All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kiara Catapon, and I will be the host for today's webinar. And this is a production of Living City Magazine and New City Press. And today we're so excited to be holding this webinar because we're part of the America Talks National Week of Conversation. We all know how quickly conversations escalate, even with good friends. So exchanges on social media, often ending insults and hateful comments, especially when we broach topics such as immigration, racism, the list goes on. This polarization in our country is taking its toll, and we want to look together at how we could respond to reverse this trend. So today we have with us a group of people that we would like to hear from of their commitment in building bridges and their experience in promoting skills in dialogues in their professional and family environment. So let me introduce them to you. Let's start with David Lapp. He is the co-founder of Braver Angels, an organization that aims at building relationships among people of different parties and helping people develop skills to dialogue effectively. He lives with his wife, Amber, and their five children in South Lebanon, Ohio, the home of the first ever Braver Angels workshop in December of 2016. Next, we have Dr. Lori Chester, who is an immigration lawyer working in Davis Brown Law Firm in Des Moines. With a degree in finance, she initially practiced corporate law. Then, recognizing the need for immigration services in Iowa, she developed that practice and assists employers, business owners, and individuals as they navigate the complex U.S. immigration system. Leaning towards the Democratic Party, she is happily married since 1987 to a conservative. And that would be Dr. John Chester, who himself is also a lawyer, a writer, and a consultant from Des Moines, Iowa. With his consulting company, he offers organization development and communications consulting in the technology, law, and financial sectors. He's married to Lori and leans towards the Republican Party. Last but not least is Angelica Kerr, works in the STM, Science, Technology, and Medical Journal, publishing at Elsevier for a portfolio of health science titles in the fields of cardiology and pathology. She earned a degree in television broadcasting from Brooklyn College and worked for various media production outlets. Conciliating and mediating greater communication between peoples and entities is a particular stewardship of hers, which draws into facilitating deep, honest conversations about race. So welcome everyone, and we're so excited to begin this conversation with you all. Let's start with you, David. So could you tell us what was that initial spark that inspired you to found the Braver Angels?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Braver Angels is a citizens organization. We bring Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and to strengthen our democratic republic. And as Kiara mentioned, it did begin in December 2016, right after the 2016 election. And for me, as one of the co-founders, as a Catholic Christian, there's really two sparks for me. One was my own relationships with my neighbors. I live in a very white working class neighborhood here in South Lebanon, Ohio, that overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. And then secondly, reading Pope Francis on bridge building, dialogue, and polarization. So for me, those were the two initial sparks. And so what do I mean by that? Well, my relationships with my neighbors, what I saw, particularly after the election, the 2016 election, when there was a lot of anger and frustration by people who voted against Trump. and a sense of, what happened to our country, and who are these people that voted for Donald Trump, and a kind of a movement to saying we should, any decent person should cut off relationships with anyone who voted for Trump. And I had been, in building relationships with my neighbors, for several years, and become friends with, many people. And and I was talking with one of my friends. His name is Lance. He's a utility locator, and I mean, he and his wife, have 5 children. Very kind-hearted, generous people. For instance, they took in their nephew after their nephew, both parents died from opioid overdoses, and adopted their nephew. Just very generous, big hearts. And they, Lance was expressing frustration about how we were splintering as a country, about how we were unity just seemed, like a pipe dream. And he hoped that there was something that could be done to help unify our country. And this was just a couple of days after the 2016 election. And, so I just got to thinking that if it's so important, if we could just get to know each other a little bit, build relationships there might be opportunity for us to clarify differences, to find some points of common ground, but most importantly, to build relationships with each other. And then finally, reading Pope Francis, for me has just been a big inspiration. Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium talks about how there's 3 possible approaches to conflict that one can take. One is to just ignore it, pretend it's not happening, which, during the 2016 election became increasingly hard to ignore. Second is just to become prisoners to conflict, and to participate and to just continue that cycle of conflict and polarization. But the third way, of course, is the best way, which is, Pope Francis says, to engage polarization and conflict directly, and to allow it to seek to find, what is valid and useful on all sides, and then from there to let the Holy Spirit help build a new synthesis. And as he says, to resolve the conflict and have it link a new link in the chain of a new process. And so that's really what we're trying to do with Braver Angels, is to continue to form a more perfect union where everyone has a seat at the table. So for me, that was really my inspiration.
Thank you. Wow, that's interesting. The new synthesis, it's a process to get there. So I was wondering, how do you and your members help people to learn that process? How do you teach this way of listening to one another when you have such opposing views?
Yeah, so for us, the how is, it happens in workshops and in what we call Braver Angels debates. So in our workshops, we have skills training workshops where we talk about skills to help people to talk and to speak in a way that the other person is likely to hear you, and to listen in a way that the speaker is likely to feel heard. And so we have those skills training workshops. And then we also have workshops where people are, like our signature workshop is called the Red Blue workshop. And this is where, first of all, it's small. So you have people about up to 8 people who lean conservative or Republican, and up to 8 people who lean progressive or liberal and vote Democratic. You come together for either 3 hours or a day. And we begin by addressing what are the stereotypes that people have about you, whether as a conservative or as a liberal, that don't reflect your views. So what are those stereotypes, and what do you believe instead? And then we share that with each other. And then there's an opportunity for listening, for a deep listening with each other, where we ask, why do you think that why do you think that your side's values and policies are good for the country? What are some concerns and reservations you have about your own side and its leaders? So expressing some humility. And then we have a Q&A time where people get to ask questions of understanding about each other. And so that's the Red Blue workshop. It's carefully structured. There's a volunteer moderator to moderate that, but it's all about clarifying the differences, finding points of common ground, and building relationships. And then finally, the Braver Angels debate. That's all about. It's not a typical debate in where one side is trying to defeat the other side. It's about respectfully voicing your view and trying to collectively better understand what is the truth here, what better try to better understand where each other is coming from. So those are what we call Braver Angels debates. So they're carefully structured and a time for people to listen and to speak with a moderator who just basically helps to make sure that there's guardrails there.
Wow, great. I just wanted to remind our audience that as David is speaking, questions are coming to mind, right? So if we'd like to invite you to write on the Q&A little square box there in the bottom, any questions that you would like, and we will have a question and answer session at the end of this first round of questions, all right? So David, I'm curious, when people get a little emotional about certain issues, what do you do to try to deflect that and help people get beyond the emotions?
Yeah. So one of the things that we encourage is, so like if I'm in conversation with somebody who disagrees with me politically and the other person is getting a little bit heated or emotional. Of course, I would never get heated or emotional, far be it from me. Is I'm kidding, of course. So what we encourage is so there's a couple things as I'm listening that can do to be helpful. One is, well, first of all, the background assumption here is that I am in this conversation. I'm not trying to change somebody's mind, because that almost never works. For one thing, what I can't do is I want to present my own thinking and my own perspective on the matter. So it's not just a matter of being passive and not saying what you believe, but it's entering the conversation not from a standpoint of trying to convert the other person to my perspective on this, but to share my thinking and to listen to you, and to go into that conversation with valuing the relationship. So if somebody gets heated or emotional, first of all, that's in the back of my mind is, okay, I'm not trying to convert you to my view. I'm trying to help you better understand where I'm coming from. And then to acknowledge before I respond. So to say, I hear you, or I hear where you're coming from on that, and let me tell you how I see it. But just that little, I hear you, and you could even, summarize back how you understand it, and let me tell you how I see it. And if there's something where, if there was something that the speaker said that I agree with, to mention that, I hear you, and I agree with you that, or whatever it is, and let me tell you how I see it. And then, particularly as I share my own experience, using I statements rather than truth statements. So not that I don't, of course, there is truth, but it can be helpful. Sometimes it can be better digested by the other person, if I know they disagree with me, to say, the way that I see it is da-da-da-da, rather than, well, let me tell you how it is. The fact of the matter is, or something like that. It just softens a little bit if I come at it from the perspective of an I. Let me tell you how I am seeing this, which again is not to deny fact or truth. It's just coming from a personal I standpoint rather than an objective or deductive. And then sharing a story or an experience. If there's a life experience or a story that particularly elucidates my view on this, sharing that. And so all of those things, we encourage, particularly if a person is getting heated or emotional. But then, sometimes if it can get so heated or emotional that sometimes it's just best to exit the conversation and to save it for later. So, but yeah, so those are some things that we try to practice.
Wow, interesting. Okay, I'm sure there will be more later. I'm seeing some questions already, but let's move on to Lori and John for a sec. Okay, so Lori and John, you're both lawyers working in different fields. Let's start with you, Lori. How did you two first meet, and when did you start noticing you were having two different stands on your views of politics?
Sure, thanks, Kara. We actually met in law school. I'd grown up in Western Illinois and went down to University of Georgia for law school, and John had grown up all around the South and ended up at University of Georgia for law school. So we met down there. I think the first difference I noted was not so much political, but more because, you know, I wasn't particularly politically active then, but of course I was experiencing a lot of differences being a Northerner in the South. And certainly that, you know, with John, I noticed those differences as well. So that was really the first differences that we had to navigate more than political differences, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And John, that first sense of difference, right, didn't discourage you from continuing your relationship. How was your journey?
When you meet someone, in a split second, you respond to the whole person, and at the same time, like to the essence of the person. So like you've got an identity and they've got an identity, but that's kind of can be kind of a surface thing. And the retrospect of 33 years, you can see that more clearly. But at the time, I just responded to Lori as a person. And there was that spark that started a relationship. And what that relationship would be, we didn't know at the beginning. We had to get to know each other. And then this thing about talking about politics, political differences, that came later. And that's, in a sense, a good model. Just to echo what David said, dialogue starts with relationship, just somewhat similar to marriage does not start with a proposal. Lori, hi, would you marry me? We have to get to know each other. But at that time, I thought of dialogue and political discussions as all about arguments and all about logic. And it took me, many years to delve into the reality of dialogue being a relationship-based thing that starts. It has to start with an assumption of trust, of mutual respect. And it took many years for me to learn that. With Lori, after we were married, these political issues started to come up. And so, for instance, we had this disagreement about the Equal Rights Amendment. And it's a kind of a test of that trust a little bit in that relationship. But I have to assume, I knew I couldn't dismiss what she was saying because she's a person I loved and respected. And so what she said, I couldn't just dismiss the way I would say someone writing in the newspaper. And because of that relationship, that dialogue, although sometimes painful, took place.
Right. What helped you in that dialogue?
It's having that trust constantly confirmed, having that, I know Lori, she's a rational person, and then eventually starting to see things a little bit through her glasses, it's not, understanding the other person's experience. So there is partly the logic of something, but also there's opening your own eyes. For instance, on immigration, I had somewhat of a different point of view from her, but this relationship aspect branches out. I started to meet people who were her clients, who were immigrants, and start to see, this question of identity from my point of view. Maybe conservative people are a little concerned about national identity, cultural change. Do these guys understand our political system? And I come to know these guys and find out they've not just similar ways of looking at things, but they're here because they understand things quite well and they want to be here. And we have so much in common. I don't want to make it seem trite, like we just have a big party, everyone gets to know each other, but that's the start. I mean, if you don't respect the other person, don't get to know their experience, you can't really have a good dialogue that's other than superficial. And it's important to try to enter into that person's experience. That's what I found in talking to immigrants, how much our points of view were similar. We still had plenty to talk about. We didn't just automatically agree, but it certainly was a great basis for starting dialogue.
Great, thank you.
Can I
And Lori?
jump in, Kiara, just to say,
Yeah.
I agree with everything John said, but another thing that has helped me in this and in all kinds of dialogue is, as a Christian and being a member of the Focolare movement, I learned, it took a long time, but I learned that the pain that we feel when we don't agree with someone who we love, because sometimes it would be we don't want to paper over it like it was so easy. There were times when it really was not easy at all. And I was very frustrated that, someone I loved could believe this, or whatever, or didn't see my point of view or that kind of thing. But, like John said, because you're starting out in a relationship of love, that you love that person, but sometimes, it's really painful not to agree with them. And that's true with other family members and that kind of thing. So I was finally, I was able to see that, that pain is the pain that we see, that we share, with Jesus's sacrifice for us on the cross. And so in seeing it that way and seeing it as another way that Jesus is entering into our relationship, that's a way that we can, that I finally was able to, kind of go beyond that and say, okay, I can't see how this is going to turn out well, but I'm going to trust and believe that it will. And I'm going to try to love anyway. And I'm sure John was doing the same, probably more so because I was probably more annoying. But, that I think has been a really big help. And I think it's something harder to talk about in the national debate. But I think it's something we can't leave out of the discussion, at least for Christians. That's, to me, I feel like we have to talk about that.
Thank you, Lori. That's an important element, definitely. Great. So, Angelica, from the bio, we noticed that your studies were actually in broadcasting and you worked in the media. So it looks like communications are pretty important to you. From your experience growing up, however, were there some topics that might have caused a communications breakdown and that were just simply too difficult to discuss? And why do you think that was so?
Oh, yeah. Typically the big three, right? Race, religion, and politics. Because we're predisposed to think that in order to keep the peace, we need to avoid these topics or be very impartial in our responses, which is what you learned in mass media and broadcasting. Instead of learning proper tools to have these in-depth, rational discussions about them outside of maybe being part of a debating team or taking a debating course. But even in that, the goal is to win your debate, right? To win your case. So race is, one of those taboo subjects that was actually discussed openly and freely in my house. So I was used to that. But with peers, classmates, and colleagues, it's usually avoided at all costs. Or if you did have the discussion, it ended up badly, as I believe David mentioned, with hurt feelings and misunderstandings. So because these subjects, they're very personal and they hit a bit too close to home because they're closely connected with a person's identity, their sense of community, and patriotism. So when the perfect storm of the racial inequities of COVID-19 and the racial injustice that was brought live to everyone during the on-camera murder of George Floyd, we were kind of propelled into where we are today, into having these deep, difficult conversations about one of the three taboo subjects, which was race. But pretty much it was a conversation that was waiting to be had.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. And now you grew up as a daughter of Panamanian immigrants, and we know that you started a group called the Courageous Conversations. Could you tell us more about that? How did it, you spoke a little bit how it started, but how does it work?
Well, it kind of started as a question, believe it or not, that was posed to me after the George Floyd incident. I've never seen the video. I don't want to see the video, but just the accounts of the video paralyzed me because it just seemed to me, here we go again. Another one, another statistic, another hashtag, another name to add to the long list. And then a few days after George Floyd, a friend of mine sent me a text, another person of color. And in the text, he wrote, "What are we going to do about this?" So not what are they going to do about it? What's the world going to do about it? But what are we going to do about this? And it was a call to action for me because I was pretty much just burying my head in the sand. And this, when it was bad enough that we were going through COVID and all the problems with that, this heaped on top of it, I couldn't manage. I didn't think I could manage. But it was, like I said, a call for action. And not only that, but it was something that has been boiling underneath the surface for decades, for a long time. That keeps bubbling up every once in a while. I'm kind of obsessed right now with that volcano in Iceland. If anyone's seen the live videos from there, it looks, at sometimes you see this big black rock and nothing much happening. Then all of a sudden you see red glow and bubbling and then lava just shooting out. And that's pretty much what the death of George Floyd was like. You know, it was hot lava of racism under the surface. Then all of a sudden it's been propelled outwards and spewing lava everywhere. So we kind of like wanted a response to this, a response that was particular to our charism of unity and dialogue. We as members of the folklore movement, those are our standard bearers, unity and dialogue. But we never really kind of focused on a specific topic, a hotbed topic like this. And we thought it was time to do so. So a few of us started meeting, friends of the movement started meeting in a small group, those of us of color who have, you know, been experiences with racism and racial injustice, maybe within the movement and also outside, and those of people who haven't, who benefited probably from the current system. And we want to just share personal experiences of race, which we never had shared before. And after sharing these experiences and kind of getting a greater awareness of one another, even though we knew each other, even though we were friends, even though we were kind of, you know, partners in unity, we didn't really know this. We didn't know this about each other. So it was a greater awareness that kind of opened up. And we wanted to open up our circle even more because we figured this is something big, this is something powerful, something that needs to be shared within our community. So we started having, you know, opening up our meetings to more people and decided having regular sessions, monthly or bi-monthly sessions of themed events where we discussed in depth. Well, first we had people sharing their experiences with race, and then having smaller workshops or breakout groups where we discuss in further details race. In fact, we just had a last session this past Sunday where we concentrated on identity and culture, and it was very well received. And you know, we're still in the beginning stages of trying to figure out how to continue these discussions, and you know, what other topics to discuss under the umbrella of racism, because it's a huge umbrella, and there's so many topics to kind of to dive into. So we're still in the beginning stages of this, but you know, there's already many powerful experiences and many graces have come out of it.
Right, thank you. Yes, and before I ask Angelica my last question, I'd just like to remind everyone who might have joined also later, we do have the question and answer session right after this. So go ahead and write your questions in the square box at the bottom of your screen. And Angelica, just listening to you, it makes me think it must have taken a lot of courage to open yourselves up to a sharing of that level. Could you just share with us what's the secret? Where did you find that courage?
Well, like I mentioned before, it was something that was waiting to happen, because when people started to open up their mouths and sharing experiences, it was like a floodgate. People were happy to share something that's always been bubbling in the surface inside them, because we were also under the impression that making unity meant to kind of close that side of yourself up, not to disrupt unity by bringing in racism or politics or other divisive issues. So the fact that we opened up the gate, everything kind of spilled out. But at the same time, another thing that kind of propels me or propels us, something that I don't know, that gives us courage in a sense, and this might sound a bit arrogant, but this is something else that came up from at the beginning of our conversations, and it was sort of a sense of righteous indignation in the same context of Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers to kind of clean up his father's house, to make it a place of prayer. Some old, outdated ideas need to be overturned as well, in a sense, to kind of clean up our house, which is our country. Clean it out of the racism in all its variations and manifestations. Because sometimes you kind of need to shake things up and overturn tables, and also to kind of prepare new wineskins in order to pour new wine into. So that's pretty much what kind of keeps us going, gives us courage. It's something that needs to be done, that we feel compelled to do.
Wow, thank you. Wow, so all three of you, I feel are motivated by some really profound Christian gospel message of unity, of love for the truth in our neighbor. So I am going to now hand over this moment of the question and answer session to the editor of New City Press, Claude Blank, who will continue. Claude?
Yes, thank you, Kara. So yes, we have a few questions here. The first one is for David. Can you give us other examples of communication tool you might use in your workshops for a difficult conversation?
Yeah. So one of my favorite questions is that we sometimes use in our workshops is, what are some life experiences that have shaped your political views? Again, that lets us understand, really how you personally have been formed by your own experiences, and it helps me enter into you with you as a person and your experiences. So that's what I always like to use when in conversations with people. What are some life experiences that have shaped your political convictions? The other one that I'll mention is when I mentioned that there's a part in the workshop where we have asked questions of understanding, and a question of understanding is different than a gotcha question, right? So a gotcha question would be, something like, how could you possibly believe that, whatever it is. And a gotcha question often contains an accusation or my own viewpoint inside of it. So rather than me trying to understand something from you, I am hoping that you will understand something from me in my gotcha question. So we emphasize to ask a good question of understanding. It really is a question where I'm seeking to understand something that you said better, and not trying to make my point under the guise of, or leveling an accusation against you under the guise of a question.
Great, thank you. This is very helpful, David. And then there is another question here for John and Laurie. Do you have any example of having your mind change, your point of view changed by listening to the other?
So I guess I could expand a little bit on that, because I mentioned immigration earlier, and of course, Laurie being an immigration attorney, I guess it's not surprising that my point of view would change, but it didn't change overnight. And it's a question also of really seeing things from a particular point of view. I think my point of view changed in terms of identity. What is American identity? What constitutes that? And just like someone's personal identity can change for the better over time, I think national identity can also change for the better over time. But 30 years ago, I was very stuck on my own background, my own geographic point of view, and that's certainly changed for me. And I think just to go back to what I said before, not just talking to Lori, but meeting immigrants, these relationships that I built, seeing things from other people's point of view, and then being willing to kind of expand my mind. And as Lori said, it's not an easy process. You're giving something up. It seems like you're losing something. It made me seem like, well, my world's falling apart. You know, what can I hold on to anymore? But you have to have the faith. There's really beyond that a deeper reality and a deeper identity that we all share. And that's what I've kind of learned over the years, that it does take a leap of faith to change your mind.
What about you, Lori?
Well, I think I would I'd go back. There's been a lot of things, let me just say that, but some of them are, you know, kind of hard to explain in a short soundbite. But I would actually go back to when we first met, which was when I was in Georgia and I'd grown up in the North. You know, when I had sort of the view of it was very clear who was right and who was wrong in the Civil War. And of course, slavery is very clear, and that's not really in the question, but that there's a different view in the South of what happened and what the effects were and what the aftermath was. And, you know, we could debate that all day, but I didn't even know that was an issue, you know, at all. I didn't even know that I was going into something like that. So of course I talked about with a lot of my, you know, friends that I made down there, but certainly, you know, with John, I had to understand that, you know, even if I might not, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, like think that people, you know, thought that that it should go back to pre-Civil War. That's not at all what it is. It's just it's a more nuanced view than what I had of what happened and the aftermath. And so, you know, I had to really undo a lot of things that I, you know, like say, okay, I don't see life this way, but let me see why these people do, you know, and why someone like John, who's, you know, a very faithful person, who's a very kind person, who's whatever, what is this, you know, where is this coming from? Is there some truth to it that I never saw, you know? So that's it. That was really quite a gymnastic at the time, because I was really young and I hadn't even met the folklore movement at the time, so I didn't have that assistance. But it was the start of trying to put yourself in another person's shoes, even when you can't even imagine what those shoes are, you know. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lori. So I have another question here for David, somebody who is a newcomer to Braver Angels, and we appreciated the events that she has joined. But then she says, I have been a moderate independent for a while. Is there a reason you require people to select either red or blue? It really creates a problem for me. Thanks so much, and thanks for doing this session.
Yeah, it's a good question. And at Braver Angels, we talk about people who are, you know, red leaning, blue leaning, or people who don't lean either way. And by the way, the reason that we talk about that is because we think that there's value in being transparent with each other about our basic background of where we're coming from, wherever that is, whether that's conservative, liberal, or independent. Because then it just it creates a foundation of honesty and just being forthright with each other. And underpinning that is a sense of safety as well, is that it's okay for me to say, hey, I lean conservative, or I lean progressive, or I don't lean either way. So that's why we do that. But yeah, so people who are political independents and don't lean either conservative or liberal or progressive are absolutely welcome at Braver Angels. And we don't force people to choose between red and blue. For the red blue workshop, that's a specific workshop where that is for specifically red leaning people and blue leaning people, just because of the structure of the workshop requires that you basically have two sides. But for all of our other events, you can be a political independent and not lean either way and fully participate in Braver Angels.
Very good. Thank you, David. And then here we have a question for Angelica. Have these conversations made your relationship with white people better?
I don't mean to laugh, but the fact that my husband is white And didn't really do anything in particular in that relationship. To be honest, I appreciate the honesty that comes from certain white people that we've had conversations with, people that I've been friends with years, that admitted things to me that I was surprised at, but very grateful that they did, that it was out in the open. Being from the North, we have a tendency to kind of hide racism. It's sort of like hidden in plain sight. Whereas, the stereotypical South is that it's out in the open, so you know who's racist, you know how people feel about you. Whereas in the North, it's kind of like they'll smile at you, but yet behind that smile is deep-seated racism. So the fact that it seems that some of that's coming out, people are even admitting to themselves of racial tendency that they didn't realize that they had, made me appreciate more that it's coming out in the open, and that they feel free to share. It's not even just people of color feeling free to share their experiences, but white people feeling free to share what their thoughts are, and wanting to understand better what to do about them, how to go about it, not just feel bad that they have these feelings, but how can they either change them or how they can use them for the greater good.
Great, great. Now, somebody else asks you, Angelica, in many parts of the US, the population is very homogeneous, right? And so whether at work or in our friend groups or at church, because our neighborhoods and communities are so homogeneous, how can we participate in helping foster these courageous conversations around us in a sense of welcome and acceptance and a culture of multiracial appreciation, even in that situation?
Well, I don't know for sure, and I don't know where you're from. However, I would guess that your area is not as homogeneous as you believe. If you did a little bit of research, you may be able to find, like if you're, active in your church, I'm sure there could be African-American or people of color community, parish that maybe you could partner with. It could be organizations that you're not aware of. I'm sure if you did a little bit of research on you look for, even just Google African-American church or African-American organization community in my area, you may come up with some that you might want to reach out to and say, hey, let's have a discussion. We want to broaden our horizons in our small community here. We want to get to know you. And that's how it starts. You just make a connection that way. Start the communication process and see where it goes. It doesn't have to be, let's sit down, talk about race. It could be just, let's get to know one another. Tell us something about yourselves. We'll tell you about us. And then we'll take it from there.
That sounds great. Now, there is a kind of a follow-up on that. Unity is the key to dealing with racism in our country. However, how to live unity in our daily encounters, with concrete encounters with racism in people, places, and things is a challenge. How do we get started?
David, I just saw David unmute
No,
himself.
Go ahead, Angelica.
No, I'm pretty much, I think we're going to say the same thing. It's just starting that relationship, having that communication. Yeah, that was pretty much.
I'm sorry, could you share the question again, Claude?
Yes, let me see if I can find it again. Yes, so unity is the key to dealing with racism in our country. However, how to live unity in our daily encounters, in our concrete encounters with racism in people, places, and things, which is a challenge. What do you recommend to get started?
Yeah, I have to agree with Angelica, that relationship. Braver Angels, we have one of the things that we have a tool for starting a conversation. It's called a one-to-one conversation. And we have a one-to-one conversation where you can talk with somebody who's on the other side politically, where we just give it's 2 1-hour formats. You can do it with somebody you can do it over Zoom and get paired with somebody who's on the other side. And then we also have one for a white and a person of color one-to-one conversation. So better understanding where each person is coming from, and a non-judgmental way for two people to just start to get to know each other and ask questions of curiosity. We provide the questions, and then people can either pair up with somebody they know, or we can pair people up with somebody they don't know.
So there was another question too for you, David, regarding the fact, so the people that join the Braver Angels, are they people that are already inclined to get into dialogue, or do you have people that are really dug into their position?
Yeah, we have people who, I mean, I'll say it this way. We have people who would identify as really strongly progressive or really strongly conservative. So we're not just attracting moderates or centrists. And we love moderates, we love centrists, but we also it's really important for us that people who identify as strong conservative and strong progressive are participating. So one was funny, one of the first Braver Angels workshops that I helped organize here in Ohio, I was the organizer for it. So when I went recruiting, I was specifically looking for people, from across the political spectrum including some who had really strong conservative views and some who had really strong progressive views. So I was the organizer. And at the end of that workshop, somebody who had very strong progressive views said, well, this has been great, but the problem is we all here are all reasonable, and we don't have the extremists and the people who really strongly feel about this in the room. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my, if only you knew, who the people in the room are. But I find that is something that happens. And actually, as one of the strong conservatives in that meeting said, it's hard to hate people that you know. And so what we found is that that is, no matter how strong the convictions, if there's a place where people do have a forum to get to know each other, ask questions of curiosity, it's sometimes hard to know, to detect, oh, wow, you're that person on Facebook?
Right. Yes, so beautiful. So here I have another question, which I guess could be addressed to anyone. It's not addressed to anyone in particular. It says, I like this concept of belonging to a larger framework than myself. I want to embrace the new outfit, especially when it's costly to me. Do you have some example of stepping out of a comfort zone? I guess every time you enter into dialogue, you have to step out of your comfort zone. So anybody would like to share some instances in stepping out of that comfort zone? Any particular experience?
Not a specific experience, but just the kind of the sense of just doing it. One thing that kind of came out of, the conversations, let's put it that way, or the opening up the conversations. It's not that I was a person that feared, these difficult conversations, but sometimes you just didn't want to go there. You just didn't want to open up a can of worms. But yet, the understanding that how important it is to have these conversations kind of helped me to have a difficult one with my supervisor when he made a comment that I thought could be misconstrued about somebody else, another person of color. And I just wanted to advise him on his terminology. And it was a little bit heated, but he understood eventually where I was coming from and took it to heart what I was saying. Whereas previously, I would have let it go. It's like not in the mood to have that conversation. I don't want to go there. I don't want to open up a can of worms. But because of the atmosphere we were in, and I thought the importance of terminologies. And this is a person that was an ally. It wasn't even like someone who's on the opposite side of what I believe, or conservative or whatever. It was somebody where I thought would be on the same alliance with me, and I had to correct a term he used, and it got very defensive. And I mentioned that if it was a checklist of responses to white fragility, he ticked all the boxes. But like I said previously, I would let that go. but because we were in this sort of new awakening, new, new way of doing things, in a sense, new way of acceptance, I felt that had the courage to say, well, even if it's difficult, even if it causes some sort of friction, we need to have this conversation. So that was a step, an extra step for me, not just the fact of having a conversation, but it opening up that can of worms and see where it went. So I think that kind of helped in the way this person now, uses certain terminologies.
Great, thank you. So another question is, what about if somebody adopts those conspiracy theory, QAnon or others? How do you relate with this? And that would be for David.
I'm immediately thinking about one Bravery Angels meeting I was at. So Bravery Angels, we have local chapters called alliances. And so our local alliance here in Ohio, we had a meeting, and we had been meeting for about a year or so. So we were building relationships, getting to know each other. And one of the conservative participants was saying something about what sounded like, to me, a conspiracy theory. And what sounded, I forget what the details of, it was something about a new world order. And so I don't remember the details, something about a new world order and the Democrats helping to usher in this new world order. And one of the liberals in the room was hearing this, and he responded, and he said something along the lines of, I have no idea what you're talking about, and it sounds crazy to me, but I want to talk with you more about this because I know you, and because you've shared this, and we know each other. And so I would like to, after this meeting, I would like to have a talk with you more about this. So I guess that to me is for me is a good way to engage with in one-to-one in our personal relationships. If somebody is saying something that just sounds like a conspiracy theory, one possibility is that we shun the person, exclude the person, right? We say, I have to cut off this relationship. The other possibility is to say, just what Rob said in that instance, which is, I do value this relationship. And if that's the only thing that makes me want to ask the next question, okay. But I think that there can be value in that, in asking the next question because you value the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Great. Very good, David.
Can I say one thing quick, Claude?
Yes, please.
One thing really quick. I just want to say, I certainly don't hold myself out as any expert in this whole thing. We're just sharing our experience. But in my experience over this 30 some years or whatever, I would say that we can't always expect, I don't think, that we will be able to have these conversations with everyone and they're always going to come out for the better. You see what I mean? So I think, I have a situation in my family, not with John, but with another family member where, we just really got to an impasse. And I realized that the only way to preserve this relationship is stop having these conversations. Mm-hmm. And so I just don't want the audience to go away thinking that they're failing in some way if they're not able to overcome some of these barriers, because I think the relationship is more important than getting to what you consider the truth or getting to some understanding. Maybe someday in the future, maybe in heaven, maybe whatever, we'll get there. But I would hate to cut off a relationship that I care about just because they have a conspiracy theory that I don't think is right, or whatever the case may be. So again, that's where you go back to that. You have to sometimes live with that pain for a long time. And that's really, really hard. And the only way you can do that is if you believe that the relationship is more important and that living with the pain is not the end of the world, that, people might not agree with you all the time, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else on this? John, will you have something else to add to that?
I think that was well said. And it's not just Lori's family. I think all of our families, we have these difficulties. And to just to echo what Lori said, but also something David said. In the beginning, it's, what's the response? What do we value more, the relationship? Are we going to respond to this by shunning people, or it's a weighing thing? And if we value relationships more than arguments, then we have a choice. So.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? Angelica, you'd like to chime in? No. Okay. I have actually a comment for you, Angelica. This is so powerful, so courageous, Angelica. Any reading recommendations?
Well, not anything specific. We do have a resource list that I could share afterwards to be sent out. But I think Living City did a number of issues and regarding race and very powerful articles there. So that's a good place to start. And that's also part of the reading list that I have that I could share later on. But nothing, and we're still very new, so we really don't have a really collated, resource list. So we're still gathering, whatever information we can, but nothing in particular, one like book or article I can recommend right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Angelica. And then somebody is asking, how does any spirituality help in a difficult dialogue? How does spirituality help, I guess, in difficult dialogue?
For me, it helps to remember that we're all made in the image and likeness of God, that we're all children of God, that, especially part of our spirituality, we see Jesus in the other. And that's a good base for anything. So when you start having these conversations, you keep reminding yourself that this is Jesus that you're speaking to, that this person is loved by God, just like you are. And they're made in his image and likeness. And to respect that, just to kind of keep that level of respect when you're having these conversations.
Great, thank you. That's a beautiful response. Somebody says, thank you all for your wonderful experiences. If someone wants to be part of Courageous Conversations of Braver Angels, what do they have to do?
I can start by talking about Braver Angels just briefly. To learn more about Braver Angels and to join the work, you can go to braverangels.org, and there's a place where it says support us, and you become a member. Anyone can become a member for as little as $12 a year. And you can become a moderator, moderate Braver Angels workshops. You can be an organizer to organize, or a debate chair to chair debates. It's all run by volunteers. So yeah, visit the website, braverangels.org, and join us.
Thank you. And actually, all the participants tomorrow will receive an email that will give them all kind of recommendations and resources. So we are coming up.
I know that the person asked about Courageous Conversations as well, and I think Angelica was going to say something about that.
Just quickly, that within that resources you'll get tomorrow, there will be the email address, because we're still in our infancy. So send us an email and we'll put you on our list. We've only had 5 sessions so far, so we'll put you on the next rotation schedule for our next session.
Thank you, Angelica. So we are coming up at the end of our time. So I will pass the mic again back to Chiara, who will give us some concluding words. Thank you so much, each one of you.
Thank you, Claude. Wow, this hour flew. And as the time was passing, we even had more questions. So as Claude had said, we will be sending out also the link for the recording of this session for those of you who know of your friends that might have wanted to participate, but due to the time couldn't. So we will have that out to you, as well as the resources that many of you have asked for. For those of you who also want to contact these panelists individually, they will also be providing their email addresses. So this has been an amazing hour. Thank you, each one of you, and all of our audience that are continuing to ask questions. And let's continue this conversation in our own little parts of the world. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.